It's caused us to give up some of the things we love, find substitutes for seemingly commonplace activities, and embrace technologies that we might otherwise not have. I, for one, did not see a day when my septuagenarian in-laws would be using Instacart. And our panelists today come from all different parts of the economy, all different walks of life, and certainly are having different experiences during the crisis. What we'll explore during this panel is how did technology make a difference for these people in their professional and personal lives? What gaps emerged that tech just couldn't fill? Are the technologies and services Americans embraced going to be permanent fixtures of our lives or just ephemeral gap fillers? And what will the lasting impact be on providers of the services we were forced to forego? First, I'd like to introduce my panelists and ask them to offer a few words in opening. Jon Husted was elected in 2018 and serves as the Lieutenant Governor of Ohio. In addition to his duties as Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Husted also serves as the Director of Governor Mike DeWine's Office of Workforce Transformation and the Director of Innovate Ohio, two initiatives focused on ensuring Ohio's economy, businesses, and workforce are ready to face the challenges of tomorrow. Lieutenant Governor Husted, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Well, you want me to do my opening remarks now?
Yes, please.
Sure. We'll hit it. It's interesting your setup. You know, how did tech perform? And I guess in some cases it did great for some people in the economy and in life, and in other places it did not. You know, if you have access to, you know, quality high-speed internet, and you have a job that allows you to telework, and your kids who were having to do distance learning had great schools with great teachers and great connectivity, then it probably went pretty well for you. If you live in an urban neighborhood or a rural area where you don't have access to high-speed internet, you can't telework, you can't do distance learning, you can't do telehealth, then it probably didn't work out so well for you. And I would say that our connectivity as a nation is a place of have and have-nots in a dramatic sense. And that was exacerbated by what happened with COVID. Because why? When you can't come in contact with a person, there's really only one way to get it, and that is through your digital tools. And if you are, you know, as I heard somebody say during this, just because you're good at social media doesn't mean that as a kid or as an adult, doesn't mean you're technology adept. It doesn't mean that you really know how to navigate all aspects of life. And we saw that come to light. For example, every state's unemployment compensation system didn't work right. It was overwhelmed. The technology in many cases was not modernized in a way. And I get it, because when you go from 4% unemployment rate to 20% overnight, your system just isn't designed to handle that. So there are some things that really you couldn't account for. But it really, you know, from our end, as the Director of Innovate Ohio and how we're thinking about things, we want to move more things from having to do it on paper, having to do it in person, giving people more connectivity, and that's really important. It was important before COVID. COVID proved how essential it is, and it also highlighted the fact that as we head back to school, we head into the fall when this might, as more people start to go inside, and this could spike up again in different places, that these issues continue to be exacerbated. And we have a responsibility in government, and we can't do it alone in government. Every great thing that we do in government with technology is usually a partnership with the private sector. And people have become accustomed to being able to order something online and get it delivered to their home very quickly. But government, whether it's through a training provider for education, whether it's the BMV, whether it's unemployment, is not there as it relates to this, and government and private sector have to partner, have to create better partnerships to make sure that happens for the future.
Thank you so much for that, Lieutenant Governor. With that, I'll move on to our next panelist. Our next panelist to give an opening remark is Vint Cerf. I would guess that in this group, Vint doesn't really need an introduction, but since it's my job, I will attempt one anyway. Mr. Cerf is the Chief Internet Evangelist at Google. He is widely regarded as one of the fathers of the modern internet, and has won so many awards, many of which appear to be hanging on the wall behind him. I don't have time to list them, so I'll just mention a few: the Marconi Prize, the Turing Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Vint, as usual, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you gracing us with some words.
Well, thank you so much, David. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel. Let me start out by saying that the internet has done pretty well, considering the uses to which it is now being put. Stress certain aspects of it that were historically asymmetric. As many of you will remember, for a long time, the applications that the internet was put to involved pushing things outbound. You know, you click on the mouse and then you get a whole bunch of web pages. And so there was typically an implementation bias towards bandwidth going towards the users. But in applications like the one that we're using, you have to push video back out the door. And so the fact that the internet was capable of handling bidirectional traffic as much as it has is actually fairly impressive. But Lieutenant Governor Husted was absolutely right that the internet is not distributed uniformly, not even here in the United States. And so we have a lot of work to do to increase the availability and affordability of high capacity internet. I would also include in that long list of abilities reliability, because if we're going to rely on it for daily work and for other kinds of applications, it's essential that it be reliable. And I would also note that a couple of other things kind of emerged out of this sudden need for social distancing and isolation and doing things online. One of them is the need to be able to strongly identify the parties who with whom you're interacting. For some applications, it doesn't matter, but if you're transacting business, if you are doing something with the state and local government, it's very important that they know who you are in a strongly authenticable way. And so we need to do more work to make sure people are identifiable. This is not to the exclusion of also supporting anonymity, whistleblowing and things like that, but strong authentication will be our friend here. And it is not easy and simple to achieve. Usernames and passwords are inadequate for that. Devices that we call two-factor authentication with cryptographic identity are important to achieve that objective. So I think we are exposing a collection of development requirements that we should be attending to, especially assuming in the post-COVID environment that we continue to operate in many regards in this remote way. The last point I'd like to make about COVID specifically is that many doctors refuse to see patients face-to-face for fear of being infected, for lack of protective equipment, for example. And that drove people to do video conferencing and video consults. The unfortunate thing is that you're not getting the kind of information you would get if you were there face-to-face. You're not getting temperature and pulse ox and pulse rate and all the other things that you would normally expect to get if you were making a personal visit, which suggests to me that while this situation persists, that we're going to need remote, let me call it Internet of Medical Things. We're going to need sensors that people can use at home to provide to the healthcare people more information about the current state of their health. And so I think that's going to open up some interesting opportunities for online healthcare. Let me stop there because there's plenty more introductions to do, and of course, a discussion still to be had.
Well, thanks, Vint. And yes, there's certainly more to discuss on all of those topics, and I'd be remiss if I did not note for the group that there will be an entire panel on telehealth as part of the program, so stay tuned for that coming up. The next panelist I'd ask to give some opening remarks is Suzanne Clark. Ms. Clark is the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the largest business federation in the world. A former business owner and executive of a top media company during the digital revolution, she's passionate about the need to create an environment where companies can innovate, grow, and flourish, now more than ever. Ms. Clark, thank you for joining us. And you are muted. Haha, Vint got a chance to use his sign.
I love it. I love it. I'm completely stealing that sign. We need kind of a new, we used to call them sniglets for that, right? We need or a hand signal. Anyway, thank you so much, David. I'm really delighted to join this panel and feel a little underqualified compared to the rest of the speakers. But I do think that as the president of the chamber, I have a vantage point on how businesses of every size in every sector in every corner of the United States have fared through this. And from that vantage point, maybe lifting up a little bit from the internet and just saying, I think that tech has absolutely delivered for America in this time. I know we're going to hear more about it later, but I would just give you just a quick couple of examples. You know, I was talking to the director of the IBM Research Labs last week and talking about how they're using AI and supercomputers to connect researchers and doctors and all kinds of scientists to help cure and treat and ultimately defeat COVID-19 was really inspirational. And as you look around companies like Splunk or Salesforce, people that are offering research and databases and dashboards for free to try to help the coordination and collaboration efforts. We're seeing people really use data and technology for good, in addition to all the businesses that are helping keep America connected. And of course, we can see the problems of the digital divide, and I know we're going to get into that more in a minute, but you've also seen examples of AT&T and Comcast and Charter and people really trying to find ways to make broadband available for free, to allow hotspots, to connect nurses and doctors and first responders. And so we've seen a lot of businesses doing good in this time, in addition to doing well. We're watching businesses in the gig economy figure out how they can use their delivery apps to get food to first responders, or Instacart, as you mentioned a minute ago, on how you can get food to elderly and vulnerable populations. And so it's been really interesting to watch the innovation that's taking place, enabled by tech, that is not just connecting people, but connecting them to goods and services they need and fighting, this overall disease. And I would just say quickly that at the chamber, we want to protect companies' ability to innovate in that way. And we see a couple of things that are going to be really important to that. A national data privacy law, investments in broadband, as I know we're going to discuss in a minute, but also liability protections. Companies are very concerned in an epidemic without a playbook, without a precedent, that even if they do the right thing, they're opening themselves up to really big liability concerns. So, I was really lucky. I got to spend an hour with Dr. Fauci on Friday in a program, and his idea, that science will rescue us, was backed up by his statement that the business community is essential to this. And so broadening that, he said, to have a healthy community, you have to have a healthy business community. And we know that's really borne out in the way we're seeing businesses, and particularly the tech industry, delivering for Americans right now.
Thanks, Suzanne. Appreciate your opening statement, and certainly lots to unpack there in the question and answer portion. Our next panelist is Chris Wilson. Mr. Wilson is Senior Manager of Public Policy at Amazon, online retailer, data center provider, streaming media giant, and arguably the most talked about company during the pandemic. Prior to joining Amazon, Mr. Wilson held positions in several technology and media companies. Chris, thanks for being with us, and I'd love to hear your opening statement.
Thanks, David, and thanks also to the IGF USA organizers for putting on this great virtual IGF USA. I know it was under difficult circumstances to some extent, and I know it's going to be a great next 2 days. I also, however, look forward to our next in-person IGF USA, hopefully next year, because it's always great to see so many familiar faces in the same room, literally in the same room together. So, did tech deliver? I think it's fair to say that for the most part, yes, I think it did. I think it's clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has been the ultimate stress test for technology, for tech companies, obviously for the world writ large. But it's proven, I think, to show how important technology is to our lives. In particular, obviously from Amazon's perspective, important for the delivery of goods and services that people need, essential goods and services, but also other things. I think we've seen from Amazon's point of view the importance of tech to enabling small and medium-sized businesses, in particular, to deal with this pandemic. I know I've read numerous stories of small businesses who never even thought of having an online presence before, and frankly had to have one in a moment's notice, quite frankly. And whether it's Amazon or some other marketplace that they're able to utilize, they've been able to do that and at least get get connection to some of their customers that they wouldn't otherwise have had a chance to do in an in-person environment. Obviously, we've done a great deal to sort of provide those goods and services to people. We've had to make some tweaks to our system in order to accomplish that. But I think us and others have been able to achieve general success in that regard. I'd say beyond goods and services, I think tech's delivered also. I think to some extent with the provision of e-government. I know, like Lieutenant Governor mentioned, that there were certainly issues there in terms of unemployment claims and others. And I think that's fair. I think I read an anecdote the other day in Oklahoma. There was one system that was in use since 1978. And I think that makes it clear that there needs to be wholesale recognition that there's IT infrastructure here in the United States, but certainly with governments needs to be updated to accommodate citizenry going forward. But I know from AWS and others, we've been able to provide some help and assistance there with an increase in capacity for the high demand that citizens need from their government. That includes e-learning, of course, as well, and school systems relying on internet connections and distance education to educate their students. And then thirdly, and it's been mentioned a little bit before, but the telehealth notion, I think, in particular, obviously with telemedicine and the allowance of parties to communicate across state borders and provide those health services to people. We've seen it's hugely important. From Amazon's perspective, we've actually launched back in April scalable testing for our employees and trying to get 2 FDA certified labs up and running so where we can do this testing and then take the lessons learned from that testing and share it with the rest of the world. We may not be successful, but we're hoping we can make some progress there because we recognize until and unless there's a vaccine, it's going to be we're going to need scalable testing to make sure that people are safe when they do return to work in their homes. So those are, I think, 3 areas where we see, I think, tech is making great progress. Obviously, more progress needed. It's been discussed already, the digital divide and connectivity issues. I think those continue to be. They've always been concerns, and obviously they've become extra important now and going forward. And lastly, I think it was referenced in the video a little bit, I would say, is the notion of ensuring that we have innovative regulatory policies that allow for quick pivoting and change. And I think we discovered it a little bit with our grocery delivery service. In some states, Ohio not included, there is concerns with delivery of alcohol, for example, to consumers' homes from grocery stores. And we've had consumers that didn't even otherwise know that they couldn't get a bottle of wine delivered to their house for dinner. Recognize, oh my gosh, there's something, maybe this is a little bit outdated. And so we've had conversations with some states about trying to loosen those restrictions a little bit as consumers have to buy more goods, different goods at home. And so, I think we're hoping to see more of that going forward. I think this is a watershed moment for the country, for tech, for everyone. And we're cautiously optimistic that we'll come out of this even better than we were before.
Well, thanks, Chris. You raise a very good point about the IT challenges that government agencies face. As Lori Schulman notes in the chat, there were several places that needed COBOL programmers, which is a programming language that was effectively deprecated when I was in middle school. So it's a little bit strange to have to cope with that. But that's as good a pivot as any to our last panelist, who is certainly not least, Francella Ochillo, who is the executive director of Next Century Cities. Next Century Cities supports mayors and community leaders across the country as they seek to ensure everyone has access to fast, affordable, and reliable internet access. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for waiting. And we are looking forward to your opening statement.
I am really happy to wait and really honored to be in such good company today. And specific thanks I want to extend to IGF USA just for coordinating this conference and putting so much thought into all of the panelists who are having conversations today. There are a couple of threads that I want to bring up because based on some of the introductions, there are a couple of pieces that I don't want to miss. But first, I really have to just acknowledge that being in these types of rooms, even if they're virtual rooms, with that comes great responsibility. When Lieutenant Governor Husted brought up the concept of the haves and the have-nots, I think a lot about whether or not, tech delivered. I totally agree with that assessment. If you were among the connected, probably like most of us on this webinar, who could take out an iPad, a laptop, who could find somewhere to connect with a reliable, affordable connection and really didn't have to think twice about it, transitioning to an online universe during COVID was something that you had to do when you were willing to do. But very often, especially in our conversations with city leaders, what COVID has exposed is these vivid illustrations across the country that we just can't hide from anymore. And so in a way that, when the digital divide is something that has come up over and over again ad nauseum over the past 10 years, it's no longer a time for us to just talk about it being someone else's problem. We all have to take ownership of it. To something that Vint Cerf mentioned, just about having affordable, reliable, and expanding availability, that is at the core of what Next Century Cities does. We focus on elevating local officials' efforts to expand broadband connectivity to every resident in every community. We believe that it is nonpartisan. Very often when I am in conversations with people who are disconnected, I have never heard a single one of them ask me if I was a Republican or a Democrat. What they care about is, can they get connected? Can they connect their kids? Can they get economic opportunities? Also, we believe that broadband is essential infrastructure. And it doesn't matter if we're having conversations with members of Congress, policymakers, people at state or local levels. What we know is that having broadband, having high-speed connectivity in your community means expanding economic opportunities, not just for households, but also for the communities at large. It means offering them telehealth opportunities, changing their educational outcomes, making sure that they can stay connected to loved ones, and even just as importantly, that they can actually participate in an ongoing conversation that shapes our democracy. And as long as there are large populations of people who do not have reliable access, we are not only excluding them from that digital ecosystem, but we are missing out on their talent, we are missing out on their industry, we are missing out on their contributions. I'd also like to point out that for Next Century Cities, we believe that communities should be able to evaluate all of the broadband solutions that are available to them. Very often, communities are in a very difficult position, very often with limited resources in terms of funding. They aren't always able to attract providers to neighborhoods that, quite frankly, don't show a good return on that investment. And so I think that it's high time for us to really think about what are those metrics that we're looking at. Is it that we need to show that there's a certain dollar return? Or is it that we can connect every single student in that community, that we can make sure that we improve quality of life and well-being metrics in a different way? Because quite frankly, as long as there are large populations of people, very often over 30% of Latino and African-American households, almost 50% of indigenous communities living on tribal lands that are disconnected, this is still everyone's problem. And finally, I do want to point out that something that I'd like to specifically emphasize in this conversation today, we believe wholeheartedly that if we are to solve the digital divide, it is going to take every single stakeholder in this circle to claim a part of that solution. That means that we need local officials to be able to evaluate what does your community need and to be specific about those resources. We need state officials to get involved with broadband mapping where the federal mapping has been deficient so that we can identify which communities are in need and how can people help. And we need the federal government, both the FCC and Congress, to declare this as a national priority. Because otherwise we're going to be talking about this situation 10 and 15 years from now. And what happens is it doesn't only have national consequences, but it also has residual global effects in terms of our competitiveness, in terms of our preparedness. And quite frankly, this is a problem that we can solve. So again, I'm really honored to be in this conversation, but I want to honor the fact that it is a privilege for us to be able to have a conversation about connectivity without thinking about ways that we have to get connected. So thanks again, David, for ushering in this conversation. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Francella. I appreciate it. And that was a very powerful way to end our opening statements. Thank you so much. Before we turn to questions, I just want to take care of a few housekeeping matters for everybody, both on the panel and on the feed. We will be taking audience questions. So if you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A function that is in the bottom of your Zoom screen. I see some of you have already started to use that, and thank you for that. And a special thank you to my colleague Fiona Alexander, who is helping cull through the things that get brought in and surface them for us. If your questions are chosen, we'll read them for the panelists. So please not only ask the question, but if you have a specific panelist you would like it addressed to, please put that in there as well. We're also going to be taking polls throughout the panel using Zoom's polling platform. So our first question should be coming up now for the audience. How much has tech helped you cope with COVID? And it's a 1 to 5 scale, and I'll leave it to my very capable IGF USA colleagues to get that teed up for all of you. Dovetailing on what Francella said, I'm going to go straight into the questions. Lieutenant Governor, let's start with work. For so many, Zoom and Teams and Hangouts are the new conference room, they're the new coffee shop, they're the new lunch spot. But the transition to telework hasn't been felt uniformly across our country. I would imagine it has also not been felt, based on your comments, uniformly across the economically, geographically, and racially diverse population of Ohio. So can you give us a little taste of how broadband availability has impacted Ohioans and their ability to work?
Well, sure. I would like to say to Chris's earlier point, if I have learned one thing in politics during a pandemic, that you ought not cut off alcohol sales during a pandemic. But the technology, look, it's been great. Look, I couldn't do my job. I just couldn't. I did 99% of what I do during the day to serve the people of Ohio now during this situation is tech-based. And we couldn't be as productive as a nation during this and as healthy without it. It is, I would much rather have gone through the pandemic now with the science we have and the technology we have than during the Spanish flu of 1918, right? We're so much better off. But it has exposed some of the shortcomings of the divide that exists educationally, from a job training point of view, from work. I always say it's like, look, a grocery store worker has to be there. And that's why I should wear a mask, to protect that person, to respect them, to respect what they're doing. And so we've seen the differences from a health, a technology, from a threat of what it means to do your job if you don't have access to work without those kinds of things. So I think it's highlighted it and it made us all more sensitive to it. And that's good. Awareness is the first start, but we really have to dig in to solutions, whether that's a technology solution that comes as a result of whether it's satellite connectivity, whether it's using some of our existing infrastructure, whether it's, I think it's ultimately going to come down to the private-public partnership, because the private sector won't build out the infrastructure if you can't make an economic case for doing it. I get that. That's how business works. What the government can do is to come in and subsidize the difference and try to cut the best deal on behalf of the people who don't have it, and to fill in those gaps. And we can't just talk about it. We have to do it. What I'm doing at Innovate Ohio and with our partners at Jobs Ohio is to identify, short term for schools. Let's go out, let's get the best deal from these providers. Let's get the hot spots in the hands of the people who need it. But long term, we have to build on the infrastructure. We have to build this infrastructure up so that people not only have access to it, but also can afford it. And that's where government plays the role of partnering with the private sector to get this done.
Thanks, Lieutenant Governor. And that's a great time to pivot to our first audience question, which I would throw out to the rest of the panel, which is that from Indra Klein asks, given the disparity that exists throughout the United States and throughout the rest of the world, any thoughts on how funds can be allocated to bring the needed infrastructure to underserved and those in rural areas? And for the panelists, I would say, give me the high sign, that'll work. Vint, go ahead.
Hi there. Well, this is a very important question, obviously. I'd like to draw attention to a couple of things that I've been able to do. There's a people-centered internet, which is out on the West Coast, that I founded and used to chair. We have a program of getting the Native American reservations up online. We've also alerted them to the opportunity to get access to educational broadband spectrum in the 2.5 gigahertz range. Well, they only have to apply. It doesn't cost a thing. But there is a deadline right now of August 3rd hoping to get the FCC to agree to postpone that deadline. The idea is to get access to that bandwidth and then be able to use it in order to propagate internet access. There are other technologies that are coming along. One of them is free space lasers as an alternative to dedicated fiber. It's less expensive to have, a pair of laser shots than it is to have to dig trenches for fiber. That's another way of extending access to the internet. The thing I would like to endorse that Lieutenant Governor Husted mentioned is incentives for extending access to internet, whether that's subsidies or other kinds of policies. Anything that gets the private sector interested in helping to get this capability in everyone's hands is very important. I will say that the investments that the government makes could be leveraged. For example, FirstNet is a major initiative that is underway in order to extend online access for first providers or first responders. That infrastructure could potentially also be purposed in order to extend access into the rural parts of the country. And again, some kind of partnership there might be useful. I won't go on and on. There's lots more to be said, but except to mention one other thing, and that's low Earth orbiting satellites. The thing that Elon Musk is working on might turn out to be a pretty powerful way of giving access to the internet if it's economically attractive, and there are issues associated with what the cost will turn out to be. I don't know what the answer is to that, but making it affordable is vital to making it useful.
Thanks, Vint. Yeah, the laser concept seems very interesting. I'm sure there's a Dr. Evil laser beams joke in there somewhere. But I would also note that Chris Wilson is on the panel. You mentioned Elon Musk's Starlink initiative, but Chris works for a company that's also dealing with Project Kuiper, which is going in the same direction. Chris, what have the challenges, what has Amazon done to help sort of tackle these challenges and make sure that their services are available to as many people as possible?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, Kuiper obviously is a satellite project that we're hoping to launch in the coming years to also provide hopefully some additional connectivity for those parts of the both by the United States but also the world that don't otherwise have connectivity, and so we're hoping that that can work. Beyond that, of course, we are utilizing a lot of different things to provide goods and services to our customers. We've, as my CEO Jeff Bezos announced back in I believe April or May, we are investing billions, I think upwards of $4 billion into COVID-related initiatives, both for regard to our fulfillment centers, but other work that we are doing in order to provide those goods and services. We've hired over 175,000 people in a matter of just months, most of whom we are keeping on board full time going forward. We've made over 150 process changes to our fulfillment centers in order to provide the necessary social distancing and safety precautions for our employees. We've, in some cases, in some countries, we've had to tweak the bit rates for our streaming video product in order to ensure that broadband networks in certain countries were not overloaded. So we took some voluntary initiatives in that regard. So all examples, I think, of where we've made changes and investments into ensuring that our goods and services can continue to be delivered to customers around the world during this very challenging time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Chris. Thank you. Suzanne, I did want to turn to you for a moment. The Lieutenant Governor mentioned, as it turns out, the most successful initiatives that the government undertakes are with the private sector. And, you represent the largest private sector group in the world. As we're seeing more and more Americans go to online learning and working online, from your perspective, how do we ensure that Americans without access aren't getting left behind?
Well, first of all, as a girl who was born in Dayton, Ohio, I'm always happy to see the Lieutenant Governor. So nice to see you. And I have to say that by person that I consider my new friend over here, Francella, we've got to do some work together. I'd like to expand what we're doing on the digital divide with you. So this panel's already giving me a lot of ideas, which I guess isn't why I'm really here. So to answer your question, look, I think we've talked about telehealth, we've talked about education, but let me bring in a third point, which is there are small businesses in rural areas that have not been able to sell online, use the internet as a platform because of their lack of broadband access. So I do think bringing business into this for a second. In fact, I wrote down the number earlier. The numbers say, in a study we released earlier this year, that if rural businesses had access to digital tools, it would be a $41 billion increase in GDP and an increase of 300,000 jobs. So given that we know what a job means to a community and to a health outcome, the impact on rural America and places currently without the right access to digital tools isn't just for that family or for that business, but for the whole community and its health. So I do want to just bring that into the conversation as well.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a point that is well taken, Suzanne, and one that we would absolutely expand on. Francella, would you like to chime in on any of this? It seems like we've been dancing around a lot of things we work on at Next Century Cities, so I would imagine you'd have something to say.
Yes, well, because for us, we think all the time about the fact that small businesses are at the heart of these local economies that are not only cash strapped, but are also going to miss out on additional revenues as, we continue to be in the state of whatever the new normal is in COVID. And I think that, there's always a realistic point when we're thinking about, okay, there are people who are connected and the people who are in places that are disconnected, whether it be rural areas, tribal lands, just far away, remote places. We're going to have to really think carefully about not only getting people to get out to those places, whether it's providers, training people, but really supporting them coming up with their own solutions, because we are very aware of the fact that they are not only going to be consumers in the digital ecosystem, but they would also contribute to the digital ecosystem. So whether that's them creating, whether that's them starting businesses, we know that exists, and that's part of what we need to jumpstart those economies. So we are wholeheartedly in support of not only that being the reason that we help at least try and lure providers into those areas, but really instead of thinking about ways to lure providers into places that they don't want to go, really thinking carefully about what kind of community partnerships, what kind of imagination and genius can we tap into at the local level so that they can create their own solutions. And once we get that pool of ideas and really start to brainstorm and socialize how we can make that happen, we need not only the government support, but also private sector partnership to make it happen.
Vint, you had raised your hand?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. One of them is that there has been state legislating to try to inhibit municipal internet construction. Apparently, fomented by some of the existing internet service providers. And I think that needs to be re-examined. It should not be illegal for a municipality to get together and build internet if it can't get it any other way. So that's one point to be made. The second thing, though, is that the more we depend on this infrastructure, the more safety is important. If it's not reliable, if it is rife with cyber attacks and other things, it's going to be a fragile infrastructure on which to build an economy. And so we still have a lot of work to do to teach people how to be safe on the internet, to give them tools for making themselves safer, for pushing two-factor authentication and making it easy to use, a variety of things that need to happen in order to make sure that this infrastructure that we are now at the moment depending on and will continue to depend on is in fact safe and secure. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
And David, can I just add something to that?
Go for it.
Part of that is a great reason that shows we can't address access without addressing adoption, and the adoption issues that are about making sure that people understand the technology, that they can actually have the tools that they need to get online, and then they have the digital literacy to be able to navigate them. Because it's not enough for us to have a pool of digital neophytes who can only, maybe open an email account, or maybe they can get on a social media platform. We want people to be able to intelligently not only create, but be able to navigate those systems safely. So I wholeheartedly agree with that.
That's great. Thank you. I'm gonna turn at this point to another audience question and tie it back. Suzanne, I have a question and I apologize. I'm going to make my best effort with your name, Siva Subramanian Muthuswamy. Who says, is it good to be content with what tech delivered during the crisis? Is it enough? Or is there enough structured collaboration within the business community? Suzanne, I think what we've seen a lot of is we've talked a lot about how the digital economy has come through, but there are a lot of Main Street businesses that are just not prepared to go all digital, what kind of collaboration have we seen to make sure that we're connecting, the folks in the business community who were not prepared for this transition?
Well, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I think
Yeah.
starting with the question, I think the answer is none of us are ever content, right? I think as whether we're scientists or business leaders or government leaders or leaders of movements, we're not the type of people who are content, or we wouldn't have our day job. So the answer is it's never enough, right? We're always pushing ourselves to do more. I think when I said at the beginning, did tech deliver for America? It's yes because of science. It's yes because of innovation. It's yes because of a lot of things. If the second question is, can we do more? Then the answer is always, right? We can always do more. I think in this particular case, there are a couple of places we've talked about the digital divide, but there are also businesses that just rely on huge numbers of people, or at least close proximity, to be successful, right? We're talking about travel or restaurants or concerts or sports. And so there are entire business models that can't go digital, right? You can't take a digital cruise, at least not yet, right? So I think the questions will be, there's pent up demand for high volume entertainment and gatherings. I think there's pent up demand for these types of virtual conferences and how you do the social part and networking part and collaboration part the same way. I think there's pent up demand for R&D for some HR practices like hiring and onboarding. And the research seems to say that established teams doing established work are doing very well virtually. The next gap is not established teams doing new work. And so thinking about how tech and all of us work together to solve those problems. So I think it's high density businesses, new teams doing new work, and businesses, to your last point about that weren't ready for this. Well, then the question becomes what we've already talked about. What does access look like? What does permitting reform look like? What does funding look like? What does accurate mapping look like? But also, what does training look like? Just a last quick example. I was talking on a program like this with the president of retail for Starbucks, and she was talking about how they had put some video training together on how to talk to their employees about asking their customers to put masks on. When you talk about something that's happened to small businesses, you're a local grocer or hardware store, you're choosing between employees, the majority of whom have said they would sue their employer if they got sick at work, your employees who want you to force a customer to put a mask on, and a customer who walks in without a mask on. And you're trying in a small town with no resources to figure out how to get that done. That's tough, right? So I think there are some digital toolkits and some resources and playbooks that larger companies have put together that could really help Main Street businesses in a complex time. I hope that unpacks some of it, David.
Yes, certainly a very comprehensive answer, Suzanne. Vint, you had wanted to add something to that?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. I just wanted to draw attention to the mapping problem. Samantha Shartman is now the executive director of the Marconi Society that I chair. We're working with Google on a whole improved mapping process and getting more accurate data all the way down to the census level. So that's something that I think, Francella, you might very much want to hook up with, and maybe also Suzanne. And so I'll take an action offline to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Google has a program called Grow with Google, and we've been very excited about trying to do training in all 50 states to try to bring people new skills so that they can advance their careers in directions that they might otherwise not have had the opportunity to pursue. And I can see these kinds of programs as ways of improving the utility of actually having access to the internet.
Thanks, Vint. I'm gonna go to the next piece of our polling for the audience, by the way, which is how much has tech helped you access the essential services you need during COVID? Again, for folks, I would remind you that the scale 1 is not very much, 5 is very much. The higher the number, the more important it was to you. And with that, I want to pivot just briefly. We've talked a lot about the way that we see professional services adapting to the internet being the medium on which we do our business. And certainly in this group with this audience, I'd imagine we skew pretty heavily towards people who are already quite comfortable doing business on the internet. But Lieutenant Governor, if I can throw this to you, since you deal with workforce transformation in Ohio, How have you seen this pandemic affect non-professional workers, and what trends have you seen that we could learn from in Ohio?
Well, how it affects not the same way that it affects people who are professional workers, because look, if you have a job that you can do remotely or digitally, you've been largely able to go on with life in the comfort of your own home, probably. If not, then you've been more exposed to the virus. That means that not only does that expose you, but if you're a caregiver, if you're somebody in your life, you've just had to take many, many more precautions. And one of the things that we have tried to do is we have something called Tech Cred, which we originally established to upskill people at existing businesses. But whether it's with the unemployment program, WorkShare, whether it's with our online offerings, we have been trying to help people continue to upskill during this time, because let's face it, we went from a place where everybody could do in-person services. Maybe many people, and look, who were the early adopters? The people who had access to technology, typically people with higher levels of education. They were early adopters. They were doing these things. The people that didn't have access to those things weren't. But this exacerbated it. It like in a snap, it changed the world for everybody. And those who were prepared, flourished, and those who didn't fell further behind. I see it mostly educationally when I talk to some urban educators who tell me that they lost track of 40% of their students once they had to go distance learning, that they just didn't have another contact from them during that period. That's alarming. That is of great concern. It should be concern to all of us. And so we're going to have to, so people have been very differently affected by this, and we won't know the results of it for years. But as I often say, we should do for others what we want to do for ourselves from a technology point of view. And so we have to figure out how to use technology to connect young people, to connect older people, to connect the people who maybe don't have the literacy or the availability, because they have been affected very differently. And what I'm most concerned about is educationally, particularly if we have a spike in the fall and I see schools around the country who are not sending kids back, particularly lower income kids who maybe don't have the support system at home. We are going to lose a generation of kids to create a divide educationally if we don't do a better job with this. That's where my biggest concerns are.
Yeah, I think that's, Lieutenant Governor, that's the elephant in the room, right? I think everyone on this panel who has children or grandchildren or friends with children has been concerned about, what are we going to do about education? So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to jump a little bit. Francella, I'll get to you in 1 second. I am going to jump a little bit ahead. Dustin, if we could put up the poll on remote learning, I'd like to jump down there real quick. How effective has remote learning been for students during COVID? If you can throw out there. It was interesting, the last poll on essential services, which I would consider, education certainly is essential in our society, only less than half of this group thought that the internet had been, a good portion for them to get in touch with the folks who are getting in touch with their essential services. So as we go through this poll, Francella, I'll jump to you, but then I'd like the rest of the team on the panel here to think about, what are we seeing in terms of educational trends that we can look to as we pivot to answer the challenges that were dropped in the last couple of months. Francella?
So two things, Lieutenant Governor Husted brought up something really interesting that made me think of this Washington Post op-ed, and it was way back in either March or April. It was called Riding the Bus During the Pandemic, and this writer essentially went and tried to track the journeys of all of these essentially hourly employees who had to, when everyone else was staying at home, venture out to keep the city running or to access city services. So that meant it's the people who couldn't work online, didn't have the access, had to get on a bus, a train, had to actually put themselves in some sort of harm's way to keep essential services running. And it makes me think all the time that even as we are thinking through ways to upskill the workforce, retrain approximately 30 million people who might have been displaced by COVID, what are we doing to actually intentionally seek out talent in those communities that don't have access? So to Lieutenant Governor's point, I think that it's really important for us to be able to see actual fertile ground in those communities, even though they are not currently connected. To the point about the students who are disconnected, we talked to local officials in various cities, two in particular that we documented with FCC, in conversations with FCC commissioners. And in Rochester, New York, they have large percentages, especially of African American and Latino populations, that do not have the access that they need, either the digital tools or the ongoing subscriptions to enroll in remote learning in the upcoming semester. And even in Los Angeles City, approximately 40,000 students did not complete their semester in the spring. And there's really no telling what's going to happen in the fall. And so when we're thinking about how local officials are trying to tackle this problem, this is something where it's not only a problem of access, it's how do we reach these communities in different ways and also start seeing value in everyone actually reaching them. And so I think that it's a really important time for us to think about, even if that's someone else's problem, how does that essentially affect the pipeline of the people that we're recruiting into our companies? How does that affect the economy in our local economy as well as our national economy?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with it. Vint, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off literally in mid-sentence. I just wanted to respond. On the education
It's about me, Vint. Go for it.
So, on the education side, our experience at Google has been fairly good. 140 million students have used G Suite for education. 100 million students are using Google Classroom, and 40 million are using Chromebooks. But I want to emphasize something about online education, and that is that it's still a new medium in some respects. And we've had our experience with MOOCs, and they were a mixed bag. They're hard to do, and this sort of
you should unpack that for the group, Vint. Massively online, open courses,
online, open classrooms, or open curriculum, or something. So that's it's been a mixed bag, and it's hard to do. So I would say that we still are learning how to do that well. The other thing that's interesting is that we've seen YouTube become an unexpected source of learning just in time. And I was sort of not terribly enthusiastic. I mean, I saw young people going to YouTube, and I'm thinking, well, they don't know how to use search or something. And until one weekend, my wife and I said, why don't we try to make Chinese eggplant? Of course, we didn't know anything about that. So I thought, well, why don't we try this thing the young kids are doing? I went to YouTube and I said, how do you make Chinese eggplant? And I got 17 videos that showed me how to do that. So we watched 2 or 3. We went out and bought these long, skinny gray things that don't look like the kind of black eggplant that you normally expect. And we made Chinese eggplant. And so I came away with this sense of just-in-time learning being a really interesting phenomenon, in addition to the more formal kinds of training. The other thing I would observe is that if it's true that our lives are getting longer, I mean, despite the situation with COVID right now, but if our lifetimes are getting longer, our productive careers may last 60 or 70 years. Imagine trying to be productive for 60 or 70 years without going back and learning something new. And so I'm convinced that education can no longer be, 4 years or 8 years at the beginning of your life, followed by a career, followed by retirement. And so many of these factors, I think, are driving us towards the need for reinventing education in all of its forms, whether it's in person or online.
Suzanne?
I think one of the things that's been so complicated about the move to virtual learning, whether you're an adult or a child, has been the social and emotional learning and the psychological impact on kids in particular of not playing sports, of not having meals together. And I think in particular what we're seeing, both adults and children and businesses, are, again, established relationships are working. So if you're someone in transition whether that's in your personal life because you're young and looking for a partner, looking for a family, looking for a career, or because you're a teenager and you're transitioning to a new school, or a college kid transitioning to a new college. These transitions have psychological development crises and conflicts that you're supposed to resolve to become a mature, functioning adult. And I think one of the drawbacks of tech has been it's hard to replicate that. It's hard to replicate the playing field. You know, I'm watching my teenage daughter who loved everything tech, loved everything, dying for in-person interaction, right? And yet you're watching adults who were really suspicious of virtual work saying, oh no, this works perfectly. You don't have to do everything in person. So if you're an optimist, maybe those two trends come together and we start to value both, what can be done online and what has to be done in person. But I don't think we can divorce the remote learning assessment from being in person and the social impacts and the emotional impacts and the sports impacts.
Lieutenant Governor?
I would like to add to Vint's point. He's right on. You have the tech is not the problem with remote learning. The curriculum is not the problem with remote learning with younger kids. It's the lack of the wraparound services, the support services that they perhaps don't get at home, that they were accustomed to getting at school, that they no longer get and are hard to deliver from a distance point of view. Because as I often say, I always hold up I use this a lot. I hold up my phone and say, when I graduated from the University of Dayton in 1989, you could have taken all of the textbooks on campus and I would have had access to less information than I have in this phone. I mean, so we have information and educational opportunity exists. It's figuring out how to provide the right kind of background support services, social emotional learning, all of those kinds of things, character building, all the other things that come with physical presence in school and with educators and the things that kids come to depend on.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience along these lines. Ram Mohan asks, do we need to worry about digital fatigue in a prolonged digitally social world? Are there techniques that need to be researched and then taught? Vint, you nodded immediately.
Well, it's because, like most of you, I spend almost my entire day sitting in front of this damn computer. And if I'm not doing a video conference, I'm doing email. And, at the end of the day, I'm finding it's tiring. And surprisingly so, because normally I travel 80% of my time. But that means that an awful lot of that time is on the airplane and, moving around. And here I'm just sort of sitting here. It's wonderfully efficient. My God, I can go from Australia to Austria with a click of a mouse. It's wonderful instead of being in an airplane overnight. However, I don't know about the rest of you, but I actually find myself fairly tired at the end of the day. And I wonder if we understand why that is.
Well, interestingly, is anyone on the panel finding that social norms have changed a little bit? I, for one, have noticed that people seem to respect the weekend more than they used to pre-pandemic. Is anyone else noticing that? It's certainly playing out in my life that the weekend tends to be a time that people put their phones down, which was not the case.
I wish you were right. I wish you were right, except that I have video conference calls on the damn weekends too.
All right, as we are coming up on the last 15 minutes, I want to pivot to some happy before we end with a last question. I want to switch over to talk about entertainment and social connectivity. And so if Dustin, you could throw up the poll on entertainment and social connectivity, how much has tech helped you stay entertained and socially connected? I think this has probably been the thing that most Americans, whether they're professionals, non-professionals, as long as they have connectivity, this has probably been the thread that has connected all of us over the last couple of months. I'm curious, Chris, I'm going to turn to you because I have probably watched more Prime Video in the last 6 months than I did for the first 6 years of being a Prime subscriber. So, what trends are you seeing in terms of how people are using your services to stay connected and to stay entertained?
Yeah, no, thanks, David. Yeah, obviously Prime Video is a great example of that, where, I think people who perhaps were even Amazon Prime subscribers who never really utilized the video portion of their subscription sort of said, oh, wow, this is great. I have this whole other world of entertainment that I can tap into while I'm here at home. One other, besides that, obviously, I think it's important to see that, we've seen an increase in the use of our Twitch platform, which traditionally is used for online gaming, and it's sort of a communal opportunity for online gamers to use that. But we are seeing now it being potentially used, and I think we're going to be doing more with musicians, and having musicians utilize Twitch as an opportunity to reach their audiences when they can't otherwise do it in person in a concert venue, for example. And I think that's something we had been thinking about even before the pandemic, but now that musicians especially are being hit very hard by this pandemic, that is an opportunity, I think, to utilize technology to reach audiences as well. So I think those are just a couple of examples. Vint could probably speak to YouTube and other opportunities that within other tech companies as well. But it's definitely a watershed moment for the entertainment industry. I think we all I obviously don't work for Disney, but I can certainly say that I'm a Disney Plus subscriber because post-pandemic, and obviously the Hamilton was a good moment in time for us. I think as we all found a common entertainment choice to rally around a little bit as we all sit at home and can't go to movie theaters and can't go to concert venues. So I hope that this, I think ultimately there'll be a great complementarity to the tech and the in-person, and I think having both as robust options going forward will be really nice to see.
Vint, I'll get to you in just a second. Suzanne, I'd like to pivot to you real quick. Movie theaters, concert venues, bars, lounges, so many of the places where we see live entertainment are sort of the backbone of a lot of the entertainment economy in both major cities and smaller cities around the country. We've seen, as Chris noted, a lot of changes in the way we're seeing movies distributed, concerts being attended. Do you see this as a trend that the business community is addressing, or do you think this is more ephemeral? This won't be the new normal.
I think both things are true, right? So and just to follow up to Vint's earlier comment, there was a great podcast by a psychologist, or I think it was a psychologist, who talked about for it to seem like I'm looking you in the eye, I have to look at the camera. If I really want to look you in the eye, then I'm going to look down so I can see you. And that is using a bit of energy in our brains that we're not used to expending, is this constant, I'm not really looking you in the eye thing. So I'm fascinated by how this is all impacting us. I think businesses are going to do both things. I think the resurgence in, say, a drive-in, or we talked about alcohol delivery, or, outside dining. I think these things really stay with us for a long time. I think some of the innovations we've seen around Cameo delivering celebrity birthday wishes, or Jackbox games, or, some of the innovation we're seeing, which because of my job, I just love watching businesses try to impact the social, scratch that social itch or that entertainment itch. And so I think that's been really fun. There was one this morning, did anybody see it, about a website where you could scream into the Icelandic abyss? So it's so fun to watch governments and communities innovate around entertainment and scratch social needs. But I think at the end of the day, these are pent-up demands. We are social animals. And so some of these innovations will stay. People will like them. They will be afraid that another pandemic will come. So some of this will stay forever. But people will go back to sports and concerts and movie theaters when they feel it's safe.
Francella?
I'm glad that Chris brought up how this impact on artists, and really thinking about being able to connect us to them, because I think that's also like one of my favorite parts of DC is being able to go to certain neighborhoods that have a lot of culture, that are interesting, that have murals, and so much of that is something like, how do we translate that into online platforms? So I am excited for, AR and VR technology that can actually bring either, just people who are interested in faraway places. So that's something where I actually am very hopeful about technology. But to Suzanne's point, I do think we have a lot to learn about exercising parts of our brains that engage in the parts where we pick up on social cues and really helping us to feel connected.
Vint?
I was just going to make an observation that the consumption side is pretty clear, but the production side is actually seriously impacted by COVID-19. My two sons are in the film production business. My daughter-in-law is a film producer. And they have actually found it pretty difficult to work because of the social distancing requirements and all the other things that get in the way of doing production. So I don't know whether Chris might know about this from his point of view, but I would guess that while COVID-19 continues to be a problem, that production of new content is going to get harder.
Well, we are coming up on a little over 5 minutes remaining in this session, so I'd like to give everyone a chance to give a little bit of a closing, and I'm going to prompt you with a question that I hope will lead to some interesting answers, which is, as we are coming up on 6 months in this, we've all had personal experiences that have led us to go, God, I wish that existed. If you could wave your tech magic wand, what would you like to see that could help us all cope through whatever aspect of this change in our society that we're experiencing right now? And I'll start with Chris Wilson. Nothing like being called out first, Chris.
Oh, what would I like to see? Gosh, Dave, that's a really hard question to answer. I mean, I think, on a serious level, I do think we've spoken about it many times, the need for ubiquitous access for everybody, robust access for everybody around the world, of course, but also, certainly with the United States. No one should be having to do schoolwork in the trunk, outside the trunk of their car using a Wi-Fi network for the local McDonald's. And I think, obviously, as a company that relies on the internet greatly for delivery of services and goods, we want our customers to be able to have that access as much as possible. And so I think, I sort of tie it back to that. Honestly, I know it's a bit, we've been talking about it already, but I think that's what I really want to see to make life better for everybody. It is essential, absolutely, utterly essential, and we have to work on that.
Lieutenant Governor Husted, you're on mute, sir.
Yeah, what we need, access is obviously the biggest issue. But as maybe virtual exercise that could somehow allow me to exercise while I'm in front of a computer screen all day. But, a vaccine, how about that? That would be really helpful. That would solve, that's where one type of science solves another problem in science. And also, look, I would say I'm going to go off the board on tech because I see tech exacerbating this issue. A level of civility in America that allows us to just work problems out with each other without having to tear each other apart all the time. If we had that, we would create a culture where a lot of these problems could be solved.
Very well, a point very well taken, Lieutenant Governor. The downside of tech is always it's ever present and out there, and certainly something that we could have done an entire separate panel on the sort of the dark sides that we've seen as a result of these changes. Francella?
I am going to have to award a big +1 to Chris's point on universal access. I don't see it any other way but for us to make sure that people in faraway places, especially our Indigenous brothers and sisters and other communities that are just disconnected, just to be a part of this.
Vint?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different perspective. While, of course, I agree with the access question, but I think we need to make this a more trustworthy and safe environment than it currently is. That's partly a technical problem. It may be a law enforcement problem, and it may be a moral problem. It may be that a norms problem. We really need to think about how this technology is being used. I'm sure every one of you has had the experience of driving in a car and saying things that you would never say face-to-face to some other driver because you're sort of protected by this windshield. I think people behave similarly when they have this glass screen in front of them. Then they feel like they can say and do things safely that they would never do in person, to come back to Lieutenant Governor Husted's point. So I think figuring out how to make this a safe, secure, and civil experience is equally important to getting it out there and making it accessible and affordable and reliable.
Suzanne, you get the last word.
Well, I agree with everything the panelists said, so I'll try to say something new, which is just, I wish there were, I mean, I'm being more specific. What I wish existed is a way for us to collaborate and find each other in an easier way. Because of my vantage point, I constantly find people who are solving the same problem or trying to solve the same problem in a really disparate fashion. And so how we find each other and collaborate on the same issues feels more important than ever. And that extends to talent. If it's going to become less important where someone is physically for them to contribute, that could really help our diversity and inclusion efforts if we found better ways to reach into different communities and didn't stay stuck in our own networks. So I'd love to see tech start to solve those problems. How do you widen networks, find people working on the same problems? Because I think it's together, and of course in a civil way, that we can solve the most complex problems out there. And of course, I believe that the private sector has a lot to do with that, but only with the right educated workforce, the right accessibility to workforce, and to stop this thousand flowers blooming on some of our biggest problems and instead create, kind of a cultivated garden.
Well, it's certainly a very nice way to end. I think we can all agree that would be a fantastic use of the magic wand if we had it. So I want to take a moment to thank all of you for participating in this panel. When we started this process, I could not have envisioned such a wonderful group of people who are so talented and knowledgeable on these things. Thank you so much for all of your time. And with that, I will hand things back to our organizers.